Hi, welcome to the Elle Russ Show, where I deliver content intended to inspire, educate, and motivate. Engage with me online at elleruss.com and on social media. Enjoy the show. Today, my guest is Najwa Zebian. She is a Lebanese-Canadian activist, author, speaker, and educator. After self-publishing her first collection of poetry and prose in 2016, she went on to sell over 250,000 copies of her 3 books. She recently launched a digital school called Soul Academy and a podcast, Stories of the Soul. Her 4th book, Welcome Home, A Guide for Building a Home for Your Soul, was released in June 2021. And her work has been featured all over the world in all sorts of publications, from the New York Times to Huffington Post and more. And her TEDx talk, Finding Home Through Poetry, has been viewed over 100,000 times. Enjoy this episode. Hi, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
You know, such an amazing life that has led up to some really great material that has helped people all over the world with your books. But for those of us who don't know your story, can you tell us what led the journey that happened before you even wrote your first collection of poetry and prose?
Wow, that is a very, very big question, but
It's loaded.
I can sum it up for you as my story is a story of searching for home my whole life, for that feeling of being loved and welcomed and accepted fully as I am. It's been the quest that my soul has been on since my earliest memories in life. I remember as a child always feeling left out, feeling like I needed to do certain things to fit in, to feel like I was part of something, to feel like I had value. And as a child, you don't know how to put words to that. So you internalize it as something's wrong with me. And that's why I'm not experiencing the love that I see other people around me experiencing. Or like the welcome, I would look at friends or cousins and see them being happy and feeling loved and cared for. And I didn't know how to name it. What is that feeling? What is that thing that I'm aching for? So all I could say is, why can't I have that? And so in my latest book, Welcome Home, which is my 4th book, so it's not the first collection of writings, but in that book, I wrote about that moment and how going back to it, the moment of asking that question of why can't I have that? And that, isn't the gifts that I see others getting or the things they're getting. It's the love. It's the feeling of I matter to someone cares about me. I wrote about that in Welcome Home, and how going back to the earliest moments of me asking that question and realizing that I had been living from the belief that I don't deserve that my whole life, that's what led me to a point where I was constantly searching for home in others, because I didn't think home could be within me. I didn't think I was ever worthy of having that feeling within. So to take you back to what led me to writing my very first writings, if, I had spent my whole life wondering, how can I feel fully welcomed as I am, I was very quiet because I didn't know the answer to that. So I was observing the world around me. I spent many years not really expressing myself or expressing my needs or my wants. I was more like fitting into places where I felt like I was needed, because that somehow made me feel like I had value in some way. If I had value to add to someone else's life, or to a workplace, or to a school program, or to whatever it was, then that's where I felt like, oh, I do have value. So during that time, I still had that feeling that something's missing, right? But never really took the time to sit down and express that to myself. And the reason that happened is, now I feel like I'm jumping from one place to the next, but it feels like a natural flow, is that before I moved to Canada at 16. So for those who don't know, I was born and raised in Lebanon. So before I moved to Canada at the age of 16, when I was 13 years old, a friend of mine gifted me a journal. And she said to me, I think you should start writing in this. And I remember I started writing my thoughts and my feelings. And that was the first time I felt like no one's judging me. Like there's no one there telling me you're being too sensitive or you're focusing on the wrong things, or which is what I heard anytime I expressed my feelings or I expressed that something hurt me. Like I was heavily emotionally bullied at school, and no one really paid attention to that. No one really sat down with me and said, that must really hurt to be spoken to that way. It was more like, focus on bigger things. You're mature, you know better, you know that if they're saying that, then it doesn't really mean anything about you. But there wasn't a validation of how painful it was for me to feel so excluded.
I'd love to interject there, actually.
Yeah.
Because that's a big thing for me too. So, in my second book, I talk about the bullying factor. Kids are so often discounted. It's just like, oh, well, don't worry about them, or they're just rough in their life. And they're not getting into the details of like, well, why do you feel that way? And why are you afraid of that kid? Or, and getting into more of the work that needs to be done internally with that child versus just kind of discounting it. And it goes the same for when you're like ashamed of something and you express it to someone, depending on what it is, people will also who mean well, but they're discounting it by saying like, oh, you have no reason to be ashamed. That's so ridiculous. Why would you be ashamed of that? And then you're kind of like further getting, away from like wanting to speak up about it. So I think that's a very important point you're making about just, and that's a well-meaning thing, right? Like, oh, don't worry. Those kids probably have something bad going on at home and they need to put someone down. Or I get all of the reasonings and it's from well-meaning, but it's not doing that kid any just service there.
Yeah, because you're putting them in a position where they have to defend to you why they have permission to feel hurt or to feel that wash of shame, or like you're not addressing the root cause of what they're feeling right now. You're further invalidating them because you're telling them, well, you shouldn't be feeling this way. And obviously on a logical level, when we hear like, you shouldn't be feeling that way, you know better, you know where that's coming from. On a logical level, you think, yeah, I do, but like it still hurts,
Yeah.
It doesn't take away from how it makes me feel. And if it's eliciting this kind of reaction from me, then there must be something that's much deeper that I need to address. So yeah, I went through that so much where it was like I was spoken to extremely logically, and because I grew up around adults, I was much more mature for my age than the kids around me who were my age. So I would feel ashamed for feeling so much and for like experiencing those kinds of internal reactions where I would just feel so little, and why would someone treat me that way? And then when I would be told, you're too mature for this, or better, then I would feel further ashamed because like, how could I not be more mature? And so I assumed a very mature role from a very young age, and that was heavily dependent on being logical, but not on employing my emotions or becoming emotionally intelligent or anything. So internalizing that was extremely, extremely detrimental. But in retrospect, the fact that I kept it in for so long, I believe, is the reason that I was able to write about it so beautifully, because it intensified over time to the point where when it exploded, there was no going back.
When you were journaling and you realized,
Mm-hmm.
oh, hey, I'm safe here, no one's
Mm-hmm.
judging me. Was that also the time? And if not, when was the time? Or do you remember a moment? When did you realize, like, I gotta do this for me? like no one's gonna fucking do this,
Yeah.
because that's really like, that's, you had to go on your own journey here. Like, what was that thought? Or do you remember understanding like no one was gonna do this
Yeah.
for you?
I mean, it definitely wasn't when I was 13. It wasn't when I first
Right. And you're like,
started
everybody
writing.
better do it for me.
Yeah, when I was 13, I just remember feeling the relief of no one saying you shouldn't be feeling this way, of feeling like I was internally heard. I was validating myself. And again, I did not know how to put these words to it. I just
Mhm.
remember that it felt good and safe. And then I moved to Canada at 16, where my whole family had been at the time. And feeling so out of place, I didn't want to write anymore because I didn't want to feel anymore, because I felt like I was further away from that place that I knew felt like home now that I'm in, a new country. Even though I'd visited Canada many times, I spoke English fluently. I had no issue with that. It was just the feeling of displacement, the feeling of, I didn't have a choice in moving here, because what happened was I was visiting my family for the summer, and while I was here in Canada, the war broke out in Lebanon, so I couldn't go back, and I just felt like I didn't have a proper goodbye, and I didn't really choose to now live here full time. So feeling was so painful because I was validating the pain, but I was at the same time validating that there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. And it was that
Mm.
helplessness that stopped me. I just didn't want to feel anymore. So for a good 7 years, I didn't write. Grade 12, first year, second year, third year, fourth year university, fifth year of becoming a teacher. And then once I started teaching, that's when I went back to writing, because my very first day of teaching, I had 8 students come in, and they had, arrived from Libya, which was torn by war that year. And the principal said to me, "These are your responsibility." And I remember seeing on their faces the look I knew I had when I was 16. It was a look of, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. I knew everyone back home. I knew my school. I knew my friends. I knew my family, and everyone knew me. And I was really good at school. And now I have to just fight for a place. And something within me woke up and said, you need to fight for these kids. And so I started writing about how I believe education needs to be about students and for them, how we need to move away from just fixating on marks and, you know, just very black and white assessments and stuff like that. And once I started writing to help them heal and belong and own their voices, I felt like I was doing that for my 16-year-old self, because I hadn't done that. I kind of just numbed my emotions for so many years. And once I started sharing those writings with my students and with the teachers at the school where I taught, and once I started seeing how much impact they were having on them, and how, teachers and friends were saying, we need these all in one place. Like, these are so helpful. In a way, it was the external validation that stemmed from the internal validation I was giving myself by actually putting my thoughts and feelings into words, that it served as a beautiful feedback loop to tell me, you should do more of this, because you're not the only one feeling this way. You thought you were the only one feeling this way. You thought you were the only one who had those thoughts. You thought you were the only one who had those struggles, but you're not. I all of a sudden felt like I was part of something bigger, and I couldn't stop writing. Like, every day I was working full time. I was in school full-time doing my master's, but the first thing I wanted to do when I got home was sit down with a pen and paper. It didn't matter how many people were around me, how much noise was around me. I needed to like declutter my brain by putting my words on paper. And going back to your question, what was the moment where you just knew I'm the only one who has to do this? It was it was that time of my life where I genuinely did not care who thought of me writing, because culturally speaking, I come from a background that is, yes, we are very big on literature and philosophy and all of that, but talking about emotions is so taboo. Like you don't do that because it makes you look weak, and it makes you look like you're not appreciative of everything that the world has to offer you. But knowing that at that time I wrote despite knowing those things, and despite having been the perfect daughter, perfect student, perfect friend, perfect everything, that just I never caused any trouble. I never caused anyone any kind of pain. And all of a sudden I was putting myself ahead of all of that. That's when I knew that I had fully actualized that this is my responsibility.
I love that. On that note, and before we get into some of the details of the book, I'm wondering, is there a comparison example? For example, let's say, because if you had these issues back in the day, I'm assuming you didn't speak up for yourself. If someone treated you poorly, you probably didn't say anything. I mean, and those kind of things when you're in that world. Is there an example where you're like, well, you know what, in the past, if someone had done this, I would have let it go or made it feel bad about myself. But then, like, what was the new you in scenarios that you saw? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yes, it does. So for example, during my first year of university, I remember having very few friends. I knew many people. I was part of bigger groups, but I wasn't really anyone's best friend, or I was just I would go with the flow. Wherever I knew that friends were going to be, I would be there. I would always pitch in to get gifts for everyone when they had their birthdays or any kind of celebration. But then when it came to being my birthday or anything I was celebrating, no one did that for me. No one put gathering together, and I also didn't get gifts, like specifically from the people who I had spent money to get gifts for. And I didn't think anything of it. Like I obviously felt excluded and felt like they don't care about me, but I didn't think that I deserved that in return, because I think I genuinely felt like I was less than, because as I mentioned earlier, I was operating from that place of, I don't deserve that. I don't deserve belonging. I don't deserve love. I don't deserve to be prioritized. I don't deserve for someone to put me first. And so I would stay quiet about that. And throughout university, I would still get invited, and I would still go, and I would still pitch in, and I still didn't get that reciprocated. So back then, never spoke up, never even said, you know what, next time I'm not going. Never did any of that, because I felt grateful that I was getting invited to those things, that somehow made me feel like I had value. It's like someone accepting what I had to give was enough for me to feel like I was good enough, Now, after all those realizations, I don't do that. Not that I give with the expectation of being given in return. Like, I don't think that is, I think in that sense, it would be extremely manipulative to be that way.
Yes.
But I've learned to recognize where my energy is being matched and where it's being reciprocated in a genuine way, and to invest my time in those kinds of relationships, and to invest my time in those who take the same kind of emotional um, uh, investment, or invest emotionally in me, and in making sure that I feel valued by them, that I do in return as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's also like it rings, this is of the same essence of like over giving, right? Um and often it can come from an abandonment wound, right? And it's like, well, if I help these people or I do these things, then they won't abandon me, kind of thing. Even if you're not asking for
Yes.
those same things in return, it's a little bit it's resonating with me because I feel with your scenario, it's like I'm just happy they're like inviting me to the damn thing. Like that's enough belonging for me now, even though it wasn't. But like that's what you accepted as being enough. And I think that
Yes.
that overgiving comes into play there too. I think anytime, and we have to watch that, right? When we're maybe overgiving, and again, that could just not be doing too much with one person. It could be giving to people that again are not worthy, they're needy, or again, not worth our energy and time.
Yeah, and the way I see it is, when I see that someone has an opportunity to show their love for me, or show that they value me, or show how they feel about me, and they don't take that opportunity, they're
Mm.
making a choice. And that speaks volumes to me. And it shows me how it reveals to me how that person actually feels about me. So I've become a lot more aware of making sure, just like when we talk about, sharing our story with those who've earned the right to hear it, it's the same thing with sharing our time with those who've earned the right to get that time, and sharing our attention and our love, and our how we spend our time, and even gifts, right? I feel it's the same way. I view it in the same way. So it's not, I just want anyone who's listening, it's not about like, I give you one thing, you have to give me something in return. It's not like that at all. It's people show you who they really are in their moments of struggle, and in your moments of struggle.
Mm.
And I don't mean, yes, sometimes we go through a hard time and we really shut down and we don't let anybody in. I don't mean it that way. I mean, when someone is going through a very difficult time, if it shows a part of their character that is just completely opposite from what you have seen, you have to pay attention to that. You
Yes.
can't just, so many of us excuse that and say, well, you know what, they're going through a hard time. But you know what?
Nope.
I've gone
I
through
just want to say
so,
bullshit. I'm calling it out.
yeah,
Fuck that. Nope.
yes, I have gone through so many difficult times in my life. I've never, ever, ever during those times given myself an excuse to be intentionally hurtful towards someone I love, or to treat them with cruelty, or to be unkind, or to be cold. And if that were to happen, I wouldn't say, well, you know what? Too bad. I'm going through a hard time. I would say, I'm sorry. I apologize for not being aware, during a time that I was going through a hard time, that I made you feel that way. I apologize. I could have been more considerate. So I think of like the logical,
Mhm.
mature way to, and the genuine way to show someone that you're not excusing hurting them just because you are hurting. And I
Yeah,
think,
I love that. And it's so many people make excuses for this. I remember a couple decades ago, I was in the corporate world and we had a fellow employee who was kind of a prima donna, made a lot of money for the company, thought she was, into, just could do anything. And she took every frustration in life she had out on other people and just be bitchy. And one day she walked in and like threw a water bottle across the hallway and was like, fuck, or just something like, what? And I went out there and I was like, what the hell is going on? And she said something like, I just got in a car accident this morning, blah, blah, blah. And I go, and she drove a Porsche. And I go, I don't fucking care if you totaled your Porsche on the way in here. You do not have a right to come in here and take it out on anyone. Like,
Absolutely.
I don't have any wherewithal for that in life, you know, and, but people seem to be like, well, and you know what that is? That's fucking eggshells. You want to dance around on eggshells with everyone the rest of your life? You know, that's literally a choked up in the feeling throat there in the chakra. That's not good.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's very important for anyone who goes through a time where they are being treated that way. They're at the receiving end of a treatment like that. Do not try to justify it. Do not try to excuse it. I talked about this in Welcome Home. There's one section that has hit deeply with so many people where I say, stop looking for a speck of dust in the ocean. And I say that as like, stop looking for the reason that someone hurt you. Because when you're trying to justify it, then you're saying there has to be a justification for someone causing me pain. No, you
right.
just
And the end
see
result is you don't feel good. And all that you need to know is that feeling you have.
Yes,
it's not
exactly.
good. And that's the feeling that tells you what you need to know, not the analyzation of what someone's history in life could have brought them to this point where then maybe oh my God, now we're just really, and what that does is it almost is you as the person who's excusing it, right? You're almost setting yourself up for that to happen again.
Exactly. And it's like I said, if you can tell yourself, well, you know what, it was okay because no, you stop there because it wasn't okay. That's
right.
it. That is all you need to come to terms with. And it's not on you to sit there and try to explain to yourself why in this moment it was okay, or in this instant it was okay, because then you're saying under certain circumstances it's okay for someone to violate my boundaries or to cause me pain or to lie to me or to no, you just stop making excuses. And many of us don't give ourselves permission to do that because then we feel that we are a bad person because we're not being empathetic and gentle and kind. And I was that person. There is nothing wrong with you standing up for yourself. There's nothing wrong with you getting angry. There's nothing wrong with you telling someone that really hurt my feelings. And I'm never, ever, ever going to accept that from you ever again. Or I choose based on this to end my relationship with you. Not necessarily a romantic relationship, but whatever relationship it is. You have the right to do that as a result of someone treating you a certain way. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person of, courage and bravery and the person who knows who they are.
Yeah, you have to train people. And at least if you've tried and failed, then okay, do I want to put up with this human being anymore? And sometimes it is almost like a child where you have to be like, hey, I'm not going to be spoken to again like that. Happens again. Hey, what did I say last time? I thought I said I'm not going to be spoken to like that. How many times are you going to say that before you, right? But you could possibly train someone into not treating you like that by just being, standing up, drawing a boundary. We'll get into some of the parts of the book because I love how you talk about just constructing the following rooms in this home within ourselves. But let's talk about vulnerability. You touched on it at the beginning. This was, my biggest thing. It's mostly came from me being an alpha female, not because of a cultural thing, but there are lots of reasons why. And I'm assuming, as well, males, traditionally we're taught like, don't cry, don't show emotion. And you know what? I hate that it took me so long to figure out which is that vulnerability is such a strength. I saw it as such a weakness. You don't want to show any emotion. You feel like someone has something on you. And I loved in the way that you talked about this, I thought was interesting in where people feel that classic thing of like, well, I don't want to like open up and be vulnerable again because, last time I got hurt. And I love the point you made there. And I forget, maybe it was on the one interview I saw of you where you were like, right in that moment, you're giving a person power to not only like hurt you again, but that they have this power Let's talk about that. I love that whole discussion because it's so good.
Yep. You heard that on my interview with Lisa Bilyeu.
Right. Women of Impact.
Yes. Where I said, in that moment where you are being vulnerable, yes, you are opening yourself up to pain, but you are also opening yourself up to love. You are opening yourself up to genuine connection. You are opening yourself up to abandonment. You are opening yourself up in a way where you have the potential, the equal potential to be hurt that you do to be nourished and loved and cared for, and to have promises made to you kept, and to feel honored for who you are and loved for who you are and valued for who you are. So that's a risk that you are taking, absolutely. But just because you are afraid of the negative, or if you don't like using the word negative, if you're afraid of the possible bad consequences of opening yourself up, you are shielding yourself from the possibility that something beautiful and positive and good could happen. So you are giving more power to all the things that you are afraid of than you are to all of the things that you want and that you are seeking and that would make you genuinely happy. So
yeah, and it's also like you are looking at the worst case scenario, which is not even leaving open possibility for either.
Exactly. And it's just shutting you off completely. And it's not that you're sitting there being happy that you've shut yourself off from, genuinely connecting with someone or sharing your life with someone, or feeling like you have a safe space to be yourself. Like, again, that feeling of home, which is why I wrote Welcome Home. Like, you're stopping yourself from finding what your soul has been wanting for so long, is to be loved and welcomed just as you are wherever you go. You're denying yourself that right by saying, I don't want to be vulnerable because I'm afraid of all the bad things that could happen. If vulnerability were easy, we would all be vulnerable. Like, if vulnerability had a lifetime warranty of this is a good thing, then we would all do it. It wouldn't be so scary. But the thing is, for anyone listening who's afraid of opening up, who's afraid of opening themselves up to new experiences and new relationships, and maybe even taking a step towards the career that you would love or a dream that you have, just remember the kind of relief that you will feel having tried and failed versus having never tried and never known what could have been. Like, failing to me, first of all, I removed that word from my dictionary. I wrote about it in Welcome Home in the Dream Garden chapter, where I just talk about reaching for your dreams, or, not chasing after them, but living them. You have to remove that word from your dictionary because failure has such a negative connotation to it. It's more like, I tried and it didn't work out. And the fact that it didn't work out doesn't mean that I, as a person, am not working out. It doesn't mean that something is wrong with me for trying that out. That's what failure tells us. But when you say, I tried, I had a certain intention, I had a certain end goal in mind, and it didn't work out, now I know that I can try something new. Or let's give another example that so many people can relate to when it comes to relationships. You open your heart up. Maybe you get betrayed. Maybe you get cheated on. Maybe you get lied to about, very big things that are so important. So many will blame themselves and say, I was so stupid. How could I have fallen for that? Why can't you say, I was so brave to trust again, and I was so brave to believe in love again, and to, see the best in someone again? And why can't you say it that way? And the fact that they ended up lying to me has 0% of anything to do to me. It doesn't mean I'm someone who deserves to be lied to. It doesn't mean I'm naive. Like, change that word naive to you know what? I was vulnerable, and I took the risk to see the best in another person and to believe the words that they said to me and to just empower them to be the best that they could be. And the fact that they made the choice to betray me in some way, or to abandon me, or to like leave a promise that they made that they knew was so important to me, leave it broken or to break it, that says nothing about me. And it doesn't really have to, you don't have to sit there and say, oh, they're such an awful person. That's your ego. Just see their choices for what they are and separate their choices from who you are and how much you deserve those choices.
Yeah, I
You
had a
know?
friend who had this example recently who, but she had the perfect response because she's a coach. And so she dove in full vulnerability into a relationship. Turns out they weren't what maybe they said they were. There was a little bit of a, like that heart drop in the stomach moment. But once she got past that, the yucky ego thoughts, she was like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? I'm proud of myself. I jumped in full force, even though I was scared. I dove in. Again, lifting herself up for that vulnerability choice she made, the risk she took, and what she gained from it. And, talk going back to failure. I've mentioned this before, so I apologize to my audience, but, I'm in the paleo primal ancestral world as well. And there's an author, Art Devaney, and he talks about back in the day, wallowing in self-pity is such a modern luxury. Back in the
Mm-hmm.
day, failure was feedback. That's all it was.
Yes.
And that is all, so yeah, feedback. And maybe it is, maybe you do have the realization where you're like, all right, I've run into 5 guys now who are all betraying me. Maybe I need to look at my trust stuff. I mean, not to blame oneself, but just there's more exploratory things to do there perhaps. But again, turning it around to the pro you moves that you're talking about, like, hey, I took a chance. I remember someone saying to me when she's like, I'm so scared to fall in love again because, like, what if it's not working out and I get hurt? I go, okay, well, then you're where you are now.
Exactly. And you've maybe learned something new about
Right.
yourself or about the world. Or so one thing that came to mind as you were talking, when someone says, I've been in relationships with 5 guys, and or 5 women, and they all turned out to be the same, or then yeah, you do have to reflect on what is it about me. I wrote that in Welcome Home because I get that question so much. Why do I keep attracting the
Mhm.
wrong people for me, or people who are not good for me? And the reflection there has to be with, it's not that you are attracting the wrong people for you. It's not, you don't sit there and blame yourself for the kind of people who you are encountering. You sit and ask yourself, what are beliefs about myself that lead me to a place where I've been overlooking certain things? Like, at
Mhm.
what point in my life did I learn, for example, that the only way to love was self-abandonment? Like, that's such a big question. It's such a loaded question because that is what so many of us do. The moment we get into a relationship, we forget the fact that we have wants and needs. We start living our life with that person being at the center of attention. And the analogy that I use with Welcome Home is, we abandon ourselves to be welcomed by someone else. Like, we want to be welcomed into that person's life. We want to live in their home, under their roof, which means, in a metaphorical sense, that we see ourselves through their eyes. We see the okayness of certain decisions that we make through their measure of whether it's okay or not. We see how much entitlement we have to our own time through their view of what kind of entitlement we have over our time. We forget that we are the leader of this life. it's so much easier to allow someone else to take control because we value ourselves as much as that person values us. And so you need to ask yourself these questions. Am I operating from a place of, I know who I am? Like being at home with yourself means you are in a state of full self-acceptance and full self-awareness. And both of those things require that I know who I am. I don't need someone to define me. I don't need someone to tell me who I am or what I deserve or what my worth is or what I'm allowed or not allowed to do, what I'm allowed or not allowed to like or love or put my time into. Operating from a place of being at home means that you trust yourself and your judgment first before you go to someone else and trust their judgment of what you are going through. Mm-hmm. Like all of those are forms of self-abandonment. So it's so important to be so grounded with that solid foundation of self-acceptance and self-awareness so that no one coming into your life and threatening your sense of emotional safety and your sense of like, and what I mean by emotional safety is like having that space where you could fully be yourself, where vulnerability is welcomed. It's not like, what are you talking about? Like how, like, why do you talk like, why do you talk about emotions all the time? Why do you have to read into everything? Like that is the opposite of emotional safety. And when we only seek it externally in other people, if we get what we are offered, we don't think there's more, right? And Welcome Home, I wrote, like, if you've been getting scraps of love your whole life, you think that that's the most that you can get. And it applies to everything else. If you've been getting scraps of permission to express yourself and express your emotions and who you are and what you want and what you love and what you believe, you think that that is the most permission that you have. And it is only up to you to say, I need to go back all the way back to the first moments in my life where I started believing that that's all I deserved. And I need to pave a new path. That's why I use the analogy, like throughout the book, I use the analogy of building a home, like in a physical sense. And so you need to pave that road to the place where you get to a place where you can build that home within. And paving that road requires that you understand when and why you started believing those things about yourself. And when you pave that road, you are removing all those limiting beliefs that you had about yourself and all the barriers that were standing in the way for years of your life. And for some people, it's decades of their life that stopped them from getting to a place where they could feel whole on their own. And when you do that, then you get to a place where you say, I get to decide what I deserve. The past and what it told me about myself, that's not what tells me what I deserve. Just because the most love I've ever gotten was conditional love, just because the most welcome I've gotten and the most acceptance I've gotten was based on me being a certain way and speaking a certain way and dressing a certain way and being a certain weight and being a certain, having a certain look and making a certain amount of money. That doesn't mean that that's what I deserve. I get to decide what I deserve, and I will operate from a place of fully believing that that is what I will settle for.
So well said.
Thank
as we're
you.
winding down here, and you've talked a lot about some of the things that are in these rooms you show us sort of how to construct, which is self-love, forgiveness, compassion, clarity, surrender, and the dream garden. We can bounce around here, but with the limited time we have, I want to just touch on this one thing. So in the clarity part, is learn how to remove the walls you put up around your authentic self. What are some tips, things listeners out there need to think about when gaining clarity here and removing these walls we put up around ourselves?
So I imagine clarity as the reason that we have such a difficult time gaining clarity on who we are is that we haven't seen ourselves in so long. The image that we see when we look in the mirror, not just at ourselves physically, but just at our true selves. Like, I'm sure you've looked in the mirror sometimes and you're like, who is this? You feel like you don't know who you're looking at. That's what I mean. So when we take a hard look in the mirror, both physically and metaphorically, at like, who am I? There's a blur that's in the way. It's like you're looking in a mirror that hasn't been cleaned in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. And maybe you've never looked in it when it was fully clean. Like that usually happens. We live our life and we get to a point where we go through a crisis and we say, I don't even know who I am. I actually, you know how sometimes you say, I lost myself.
Yeah.
Or I don't even recognize myself anymore. So some people will go through a phase where they feel like they are fully authentic and then they lost themselves over time. And some people have never really recognized themselves, have never really come that close to who they are authentically. And so there's that blur that's in the way because you haven't cleared up all the things that have accumulated over the years that are standing in the way of you authentically seeing yourself. And that blur could be the expectations of your family, the expectations of your culture, your religion, your society, your community, your environment, the group of people who you're a part of, your co-workers. Like it could be all of those expectations that they have from you or of you. It could be all the expectations you've placed on yourself where you said, unless I'm this and this and this, and at this point in my life by this age, and unless I've achieved this and that, then I can't be enough. Or the idea of what your life should be before you can be happy. All of those things stand in the way of you seeing who you are because they're all barriers. They're all telling you, you can't be yourself. You can't be, if you are yourself, then something's wrong with you because you haven't achieved all of these things that are standing in the way. And so for me, the clarity part is clearing up that blur. It's cleaning up that mirror, removing all those expectations that everyone has of you and all the expectations that you have of yourself, all the conditions you've placed and that others have placed on loving and welcoming you just as you are. And so one of the activities I urge people to do is the blank canvas. So in the clarity chapter or room, I say that the strategies we use are mirrors because they're supposed to help you see yourself more clearly. So I say in the blank canvas mirror, what you do is write out your life on a whiteboard or paper or whatever, exactly as it is right now. And then go through like from the way you dress to the way you speak to what, if you're in university or college or in any kind of school, what work you do, how you conduct yourself, what kinds of foods you eat and don't eat, and what your beliefs are and what things you can and can't do. And then ask yourself, for each one of those, if I were the one choosing this, would I believe this is how I need to be living my life? And for most people, I guarantee you, 90% of what they write down is an absolute no. So if it's a no, cross it out, clear it out, and write down exactly how you believe you need to be living that part of your life.
I love it.
And there you go. That's one of the best strategies I can give you to gain clarity.
Let's sort of like wind down here with the dream garden. Learn how to nurture your dreams and create an authentic original path. You know, I feel like I'm still such a dreamer. Like, where are people not like, have people lost? That's where all the good stuff's going on. And I think people, again, they're like having trouble sleeping. They're thinking about the events of the days. Like, where is the dream world? And I don't know. I live a lot in there and I find it very valuable to my life. So
So yeah, one of the most important things I say is don't chase your dream, live it. Because as long as you are chasing it, then you are separating yourself from it and you are placing so much value on a future moment as opposed to the present moment. It is 100% okay to dream of the place you want to be in eventually, but start living in it now. Start doing something about it now, because so many of us wait until we are ready. And you've heard this before. You'll never be ready if you're waiting to be ready. So a practical example of that would be, I started writing or putting my writings out there in 2016. We are now at the beginning of 2022. When I first started putting my writings out there, when I self-published, I had 300 followers on Instagram. Right now, I have 1.2 million followers on Instagram.
fuck yeah, girl.
Right? If I had, in early 2016, said, I'm not going to publish a book until I get a publisher, until I get a great agent, until I can hire someone to do my social media, until I have this many followers, until I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be where I am. I knew that my end goal was writing to heal and to help others heal. And I started working towards that from day one. I was living the dream that I am currently living as well. I wasn't chasing it. I wasn't telling myself at any moment, but this is not enough. There has to be more. Like, I wasn't coming from a place of deficit. I was coming from a place of just being like genuinely enjoying what I was doing, every moment of it. And I wasn't associating my success as a human being with how successful the writings that I was putting out there were, in terms of how much money they were making me or how many followers I was getting. Or I lived the dream of writing to heal and help others heal by doing exactly that. And everything else came as a result of it.
Same here. And it's that thing of and again, I've used this example before when I had my first book published, a couple weeks after, someone had called me and they were like, are you like, oh my God, are you like on Amazon every day, like looking for a review? And I'm like, no, the exact opposite. That is such resistance. That's me looking for people to like me. That's all the stuff you're talking about, the outside. Will I make money at this? Well, if you're compelled to write, you're compelled, you're happy and joyful. And I said, all I care is like, if I could help one person, that's great. But if no one reads it, I'm so fucking proud of the act of doing it and the thing in and of itself that I don't care. and then sure enough, people do love it. But I love that you just said that. That's like the true writer compulsion, that it doesn't really matter.
And there is absolutely nothing wrong with saying, I would really like it if more people bought my writings and if I could make a living out of what I love doing. But if that is your end goal and your only goal, then like going backwards. So in teaching, I was a teacher, I'm still am, but we do this thing where we plan with the end in mind. So you say, what is my end goal? And then you start planning backwards. What do I need to do to get to that goal? So if I want to teach my students something in science, a certain concept, I say that's the end goal. And then I break down the lessons going backwards. So if my end goal is to make money, then my goals, my little goals, are going to be all about monetization. They're not going to be about the actual authenticity that goes into the writing. They're not going to be, because that's my end goal.
Right.
But so for those listening, because I get this all the time, like, oh, you must be so entitled to say I don't care about how many copies my books sell or whatever.
That's pretty funny.
I do care. I do think of that. I do pay attention to that, but that's not my end goal. And that's not what makes me believe that my writings are worth it or not, or that I am worth it or not. There's a difference there. So
absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so we'll put everything to connect with you in the show notes, but tell us about your little Soul Academy and how we can benefit from your work other than this incredible book, which everyone can find almost anywhere where books are sold. It's called Welcome Home. But tell us about how we can benefit more from your work personally.
Thank you. So Soul Academy is, with time, I hope to put out more courses, but I have a course on letting go, not just of people, but of, ideas of who we thought we needed to be, and letting go of places and work, and just letting go in general. And I've broken it down into those modules, and it's me teaching you. It's me standing in front of the camera and teaching you. The course has been extremely successful. Anyone who has registered for it, still to this day, they email me and say, thank you for that. It changed my life. I also have my podcast, Stories of the Soul. The first, it's funny that we're talking about authenticity right now, because the second season, the theme of it is authenticity. And the first season was about forgiveness. So if those are things that you are looking to listen to more content on, that's your destination, Stories of the Soul. And you can find me on all social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook. It's all the same username, Najwa Zebian. And yeah, you can find my books wherever books are sold. And if you would like to listen to my voice, I've actually narrated all of those books in audio, so you can listen to the audio books.
Thank you so much for your work and for sharing your journey with us today. And to everyone else, we'll see you next time. Hey, listeners. Over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products, and I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.